Have you ever stopped to help a stranger on the street? And what if that small decision had the power to transform your entire life? That's exactly what happened to Kylie. She stopped to help a lost delivery guy, never imagining that this simple gesture would not only change her day, but also alter her entire destiny. Even more surprising, that delivery guy wasn't who he appeared to be. In today's story, you'll meet Kylie, an ordinary, humble woman with a huge heart and solid principles, who never could have imagined that a simple act of kindness would completely change her life. On the other side, we have Aidan, a seemingly simple man, lost in the streets of a small town. But what Kylie didn't know was that behind that humble facade was a millionaire, secretly disguised and testing his employees. This isn't just another love story. It's a story about trust, true listening, and how two completely different people can learn together that real love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be genuine. But before we get started, I really want to know where you're watching this video from. Drop the name of your city down in the comments. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 5 at the end. Your opinion means a lot to us. Oh, and before diving into this exciting journey, take a second and click the red button down below to subscribe to the channel. Here, you'll always find stories that speak straight to the heart, made especially to remind you that life can surprise you when you least expect it. Now, take a deep breath, grab your favorite drink, get comfy on your couch, bed, or wherever you are, because I promise that in the next few minutes you'll smile, you'll feel moved, and above all, you'll realize that the biggest changes start with the simplest gestures. That gray morning, Kylie crossed the little wooden bridge connecting her home to the bakery where she'd worked since she was 17. Clouds hung heavily over the town, as if carrying secrets ready to spill. Her apron was already folded in. Her bag, and her hair tied in a messy bun revealed the typical hurry of someone who barely had time for coffee. In this part of town, every minute counted. Even exhausted, Kylie still managed to smile at her neighbors. She believed kindness was a way to resist the harshness of the world. On her way, she noticed a white van parked in front of the market. A tall man wearing a gray hoodie and a delivery backpack spun his phone in his hands, looking visibly lost. She hesitated for a second, then crossed the street without a second thought. "Are you okay?" she asked, with a serene, curious voice. The man slowly turned around, surprised that someone noticed his confusion. His gaze was intense yet reserved, as though observing everything from a cautious distance. "I'm trying to find Willow Street, but I think this map doesn't like me much," he replied with an embarrassed smile. Kylie let out a quiet, spontaneous laugh. "That happens all the time here. GPS goes crazy near the train station. Want me to show you the way?" He hesitated. He wasn't used to that kind of help. Actually, he was there precisely to test the humanity behind the company he'd inherited, without revealing his name, without security, without status. Aidan hadn't expected anyone to lend a hand so naturally. "If it's not too much trouble," he said. "I'm Kylie. And you?" "Aidan." Just that. And they began walking together. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. On the contrary, it felt oddly familiar. She pointed out spots around town as she spoke lightly, as if she were a guide in a place where everything still mattered. The old school, the newsstand, the corner ice cream shop. Aidan absorbed every detail, more interested in her than in Willow Street. There was something about Kylie, her spontaneity, empathy, effortless simplicity, that unsettled him. And that was rare, very rare. Arriving at their destination, she stopped in front of a modest house with a homemade sign that read, "Mrs. Linda's Artisan Bread Atelier." Here it is. Willow is this hidden street between the hydrangeas. He looked around, surprised by the rustic charm and beauty of the town. "I really would have gotten lost alone." Kylie smiled. "Most people do, but there's always someone nearby to show the way, if we dare to ask." With that, she waved goodbye and continued on her way. Aidan stood there for a moment, just watching her. Gesture had been small, but for him, it was enormous. After years surrounded by people who approached only out of self-interest, that interaction felt absurdly genuine. Little did Kylie know that the simple act of showing someone a street would be the start of something life-changing. Aidan took his phone, glanced at the atelier's facade, then at the name Kylie, which echoed in his mind. It wasn't mere curiosity. It was something more, something even he, with all his corporate logic, couldn't explain. Kylie arrived at the bakery and tied her apron while greeting the owner, who was like a grandmother to her. "You're late, young lady." "Only 5 minutes," she retorted with a smile. As she turned on the oven and organized the trays, her mind drifted back to her conversation with the lost delivery guy. There was something in his eyes, a silence that spoke louder than words. But she wasn't the type to fantasize about strangers. Still, the name, Aidan, seemed stuck somewhere deep inside her. Meanwhile, Aidan continued his plan to visit his companies. Branches disguised as a delivery man. He had inherited the corporation after his father's sudden death, but always questioned what lay behind the reports and graphs. He wanted to see it firsthand, to feel. Now, he faced an unexpected dilemma. In less than an hour in that town, someone had already moved him, not as a businessman, but as the man behind the armor. He returned to the van, sat in the driver's seat, and stared into the rearview mirror as if seeing someone he didn't recognize. "Who are you, Aidan?" he murmured. The reflection showed a young, wealthy man, tired of hollow relationships. And for the first time in years, he felt the desire to meet someone without masks, without contracts, just to know them. Simply that. At the bakery, Kylie served the first customers with her usual warmth. While serving an elderly couple, she overheard one say, "Today, the sky is heavy, but this girl brings a bit of sunshine with her smile." She blushed, unaccustomed to compliments, much less being truly noticed. Her life had always been about work, bills, and survival. But somewhere in her heart, there was still room for something new. Something that might have started with a strange name spoken on the sidewalk. Aidan. Meanwhile, Aidan was making notes on his phone about the atelier's structure, employees, and managers' behavior. It was part of the mission, yet his fingers hesitated while typing. His focus was divided. It felt as if that simple town had lifted some weight from his soul for a few minutes. All because of a woman who just wanted to help someone lost. Or perhaps someone who also had no idea how lost he was. That night, Kylie returned home to her usual ritual: soup simmering on the stove, soft music on the radio, and an old notebook where she scribbled loose thoughts. But on that page, next to the banana bread recipe, she wrote something unusual. "Today I helped someone who seemed lost, but maybe I was the one who found myself for a few minutes." Aidan slept at the small hotel in town. The room was simple, almost Spartan, a stark contrast to the penthouses he usually hid in. But there, between worn cotton sheets and the sound of rain hitting the window, he felt strangely at peace, as though that town, and especially that girl, were part of something he didn't know. He'd been searching for. "Take a tea breakfast," Aidan discreetly watched locals discussing the autumn festival, seasonal struggles, and the old warehouse renovation. Each conversation was a puzzle piece of the community, and in each, Kylie's name appeared, like a thread connecting people with sweetness and strength. He smiled. There was no doubt left. He needed to see her again, though he didn't yet know how. That very moment, Kylie arranged flowers in the bakery window when she heard the doorbell chime. A new customer. For a brief second, her heart raced. But it wasn't him. She sighed, feeling silly for expecting otherwise. "Back to reality, Kylie," she murmured. But what she didn't yet know was that chance rarely knocks twice at a door already ajar. Late afternoon finally brought the heavy sky down. Rain poured fiercely, washing the town's streets as if trying to erase the day's traces. Kylie waited for the storm under the bakery's awning, arms crossed, staring into the horizon. Some drops escaped the covering, splashing on cracked pavement. She liked watching the rain. There was something comforting in its steady rhythm, a reminder that everything passes. But that day, her thoughts were far away, focused on a delivery guy in a gray hoodie and quiet eyes. As much as she tried to deny it, she wanted to see him again. That on the other side of town, Aidan walked beneath the heavy clouds, unconcerned about getting drenched. His hood failed against the downpour, shoes soaked and noisy with each step. But something inside felt lighter, as though the rain washed away more than his clothes. It washed away armor, urgency, and lies. Inside his backpack, audit papers lay forgotten. In his mind, only one name persisted: Kylie. He didn't understand why, but he was sure this simple woman had touched something deep, something he didn't realize still existed within him. While closing the bakery's register, Kylie commented to the owner, Have you ever noticed how sometimes a person you've never seen awakens memories you didn't even know you had? The woman raised her eyes from the numbers and smiled wisely. Sometimes, my dear, it isn't memory. It's the heart recognizing something the mind doesn't yet understand. Kylie smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. But those words echoed inside her, strongly, like a sign that something was about to change, even if she didn't ask for it, even if she feared it. Aidan arrived at the hotel soaked, but with a decision made. He'd return to the atelier tomorrow, not as a billionaire or CEO, but as the same lost delivery guy. He wanted to know if Kylie's eyes would recognize him, if that gesture had just been kindness or something more. It wasn't usual for him to feel such curiosity or such hope, but something about that town and that woman made him feel safe enough to lower his guard, even if only for a moment. And so, while the town fell asleep beneath the sound of rain, two vastly different worlds had briefly intersected, leaving marks behind. Aidan, the billionaire disguised in narrow streets, and Kylie, the ordinary woman who never dreamed of luxury but always believed in simple gestures. Little did they know, fate had only begun writing their story. The next morning, the sun still struggled to break through the clouds as Aidan slipped on the same gray hoodie and soaked sneakers from the day before. There was something deliberately symbolic about that choice. He could have easily put on dry, comfortable clothes, even subtly expensive ones. But he wanted to be the same man she had seen, the same confused delivery guy who received her help without needing to prove anything. For the first time in a long while, not being recognized felt like relief. He wanted her to see him, not the last name. Kylie arrived early at work. She had baked a special cake using leftover ingredients from the day before, a personal tradition she called Hope Cake. It was her way of believing better days could begin with a slice of care. As the oven heated up, she arranged the display window and organized fresh flowers in recycled jars. The scent of cinnamon and sugar filled the air, and for a moment, she felt peace. But there was a restlessness she couldn't name, a strange anticipation, like something was about to happen. Aidan arrived at the bakery exactly at 8. He opened the door slowly, trying not to make noise, but the chime above rang out like a signal that the unexpected had returned. Kylie lifted her eyes from the counter, and, for a moment, her gaze froze. He was there, the lost delivery man. Same jacket, same attentive eyes. But now there was something different. A restrained glow, a silence that screamed. Lost again, she teased, hiding her surprise behind a smile. Maybe, he replied, scratching the back of his neck, slightly embarrassed. Or maybe I just remembered the smell of this place. She laughed, unable to hide her curiosity. You've got a good memory then. He answered, or maybe, I just had a good first impression. The words lingered in the air like golden dust, carrying something more than casual conversation. Kylie offered him a slice of the fresh cake and invited him to sit on the bench by the window. He accepted, without hesitation. As he tasted the cake, his eyes closed briefly. This tastes like childhood, he murmured. Kylie smiled. I call it Hope Cake. It's made from what's left over, but it always turns out better than the ones I plan. I like the philosophy. It's my life, summed up in sugar and patience. Aidan watched her like every word she said was crumbling a wall inside him. There was something strong and yet vulnerable about her that made him feel seen. She, on the other hand, tried not to show how fast her heart was racing. There was something about that man that didn't fit the ordinary, something that intrigued and enchanted her at the same time. But she was practical. She had been let down too many times to fantasize about a charming stranger. Still, there was a connection she couldn't ignore. Do you deliver around here often? She asked casually. Just started. I'm getting to know the places, the names, the stories, he replied, with a disarming sincerity. Time slowed down that morning. Aidan stayed longer than necessary. He watched the rhythm of the street, the customers coming and going, and every gesture Kylie made. The way she folded napkins, how she listened attentively to orders, how she smiled effortlessly. It was like watching the beauty of a life he never had time to know. In that bakery, the walls held no luxury, but every corner had soul, and he was starving for that. Kylie noticed he wasn't a typical delivery guy, not just because of how he spoke, but because of the way he looked around. The silences that seemed to carefully choose each word. You're not from around here, are you? She said, already knowing the answer. That obvious? He replied with a half smile. You've got that look, like someone who's seen too much and is trying to forget. Aidan held his breath. For a second, this woman saw more than he wanted. He didn't know how, but he felt safe there. It was like Kylie had a built-in moral compass that sensed what others ignored. That scared him, but it also drew him in. And you? Have you always worked here? He asked, shifting the spotlight. Since I was 17. Started cleaning the floors. Now I bake and handle the books. Life taught me to grow with what I have. Aidan nodded silently. That answer said more than any CEO resume. She was everything he never had. Grounded, simple, whole. When the rush slowed down, she wiped the counter while he still sat there. You don't have deliveries today? She asked playfully. I do, but nothing that can't wait a little. She tilted her head, surprised. Punctuality isn't valued where you come from. He shrugged. I think I'm starting to value other things. Their gaze lingered longer than it should have, until a new customer walked in and broke the moment. Outside, Aidan waved goodbye and walked slowly down the sidewalk. But he didn't leave. He stopped at the corner and stood there, watching the bakery from afar. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Messages from the board, emails from the company. Demands from a life he had decided to pause, at least for a few days. He knew the undercover visit to the branches was important. But now, something more urgent was unfolding. He was being tested as a man. Kylie watched him from inside, cleaning, rag still in hand. That figure fading into the late morning mist wasn't just another customer, not just another face. And she knew it. She didn't know his last name or where he came from, but there was something in him that reminded her of everything still possible, even after all the scars. Something inside her was beginning to soften, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. That same afternoon, Aidan visited the company's local branch as planned. He posed as just another delivery man, discreetly analyzing processes, staff, and environment. But his mind wasn't there. Every time someone said the name Kylie, even if it wasn't her, his heart skipped a beat. It was as if her presence had infiltrated his routine, breaking down every attempt at emotional distance. He hadn't planned for this, and that was what troubled him most. While filling out a report with notes on the team, he scribbled in the corner of the page, "Hope Cake." He smiled without realizing it. It was the first genuine smile he'd had in days. He missed a place where he'd only spent an hour, and someone who spoke straight from the heart. Something inside him was changing, slowly, irrevocably. When Kylie closed the shop, she received a package with a note. For those who know how to guide, even when the other has no idea where they're going. Thank you for this morning. No signature, but she knew. She tucked the note between the pages of her recipe notebook and sighed. There was something in those words that made her believe maybe Chance had a plan. That night, both lay staring at their ceilings in silence. One in a cold hotel, the other in a room that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. But their thoughts were the same. Was what they felt real, or just a fragment of a moment too magical to last? The town slept, but destiny was wide awake, moving invisible pieces in a story that had only just begun. The next morning, Kylie walked to work, glancing discreetly at each corner, as if hoping to find something without seeming like she was searching. She knew it was silly. She barely knew the man. But there was a feeling she couldn't shake. The note had stirred her more than it should have, not because of the gesture, but for the meaning hidden in the words. It felt like someone had finally seen who she was, without needing long conversations. And that was rare and dangerous, for someone who had already been disappointed too many times. Aidan, meanwhile, opened his laptop in the hotel room and sent an email to his assistant asking for more days away from headquarters. He claimed it was for field evaluation, but he knew there was more to it than a corporate mission. He was allowing himself to feel, and that was new. Sitting next to someone like Kylie, hearing simple stories, laughing at small things, felt more valuable than any million-dollar meeting. There was something about her that made him want to be better, not as a CEO, but as a man, and that scared him as much as it pulled him closer. During her shift, Kylie noticed something unusual. A new customer came in, ordered 2 coffees and a slice of Hope Cake, and mentioned he'd heard about the place from a delivery guy in town. She smiled, said nothing, but her heart beat faster. Was Aidan spreading her story, or just looking for an excuse to talk about her? It didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen by someone who didn't want to fix her, save her, or change her. Just hear her. And that was rarer than any seasonal flower. At the end of the day, she walked up to the highest point in town, a lookout where she could see the red rooftops, the church tower, and the fields beyond. There, where she always went to think, she sat with the note in her lap. The wind tousled her hair and brought the scent of pine from the mountains. "Who are you, Aidan?" she whispered to herself. She didn't know if he would come back, but something inside told her that this story wasn't over. It had only just begun. 2 days had passed since Aidan's last visit to the bakery, and Kylie tried to carry on with her routine as if nothing had happened. But it wasn't true. She still looked toward the door at every chime of the bell, pretending to be surprised by each new customer, even though she knew it wasn't him. She didn't want to seem foolish, but something about his silence hurt more than it should have. And still she understood. People who carry pain within them often learn to run before they get attached. She had done it herself countless times. But with him, it was different. Aidan, on the other side of town, continued his mission of visiting the company's branches, but now with a divided heart. He was starting to feel like he belonged in that town, not as a CEO or heir, but as an ordinary man who could walk into a bakery, eat cake, and listen to stories. But inside him, a tension was growing. The lie was starting to weigh on him. He was hiding, and Kylie didn't know. He hated deceiving honest people, especially someone who saw the world with such clarity. But he also didn't know how to tell her the truth. Without risking everything to the company's headquarters, his absence was starting to raise questions. The board wanted answers, the shareholders demanded decisions, and his right-hand man kept reminding him that he was the face of the brand. Aidan, however, was beginning to doubt whether he wanted to be the face of anything that didn't have a soul. His time with Kylie had shown him the brutal contrast between the corporate world and the reality of those who held everything together with silent labor. And it was eating him alive. For the first time, he could see the gears from the inside, and he could no longer pretend not to see what was broken. That afternoon, driven by restlessness, he returned to the bakery. He entered slowly, like someone coming back to a safe place. Kylie was busy arranging trays. When she saw him, she froze for a second. Her heart reacted before her mind. "I thought you'd left," she said, with a small smile. "So did I," he replied, sitting on the same bench as before. There was no hug, no touch, no declarations. But something didn't need to be said. A silent reunion, full of meaning. "Do you always disappear like that?" she asked playfully. "Sometimes. The world demands it," he said, looking out the window. "But the world isn't always right," Kylie replied firmly, grabbing 2 mugs of coffee. He looked at her with gratitude, as if her words had touched a precise point inside him. "Thank you for reminding me. Sometimes we just need to hear the obvious from the right person," she said. They clinked their mugs together like a toast to a pause in the world's hurry. They talked about simple things, the upcoming autumn festival, new recipes she wanted to try, the town's gossip. Aidan listened intently, as if every word she spoke were an antidote to the emptiness he'd always felt. And Kylie spoke naturally, as if she'd known him forever. But inside, questions were stacking up. Who was he, really? Where did that deep, knowing look come from in someone who said so little? She wanted to know, but was afraid of the answer. As they left, he hesitated. "Can I show you something?" he asked, unexpectedly. "Now?" she asked, raising her brow. He nodded. "Now." She removed her apron, asked the owner for a moment, and went with him. They walked through narrow streets until reaching a rundown building. "This used to be my grandmother's candy factory," he said. "She passed away before I could tell her how much she inspired me. I came here as a kid, and now I'm back." Without knowing why, Kylie looked around. The place bore the marks of time, but held a melancholic kind of beauty. "You know, I thought you were just a lost delivery guy. But now I see you have more questions than maps." He laughed, touched by her insight. "Maybe I'm both." She met his eyes. "What are you looking for, Aidan?" He breathed in deeply. "I don't know yet. But yesterday, I felt like I wasn't searching alone." She leaned against the old doorway and crossed her arms. "You don't have to fake simplicity to be accepted, you know? I may not have money, but I know when someone's carrying the weight of hiding who they are." Aidan stared at her in silence. This was the first crack, the moment the truth began to leak through the edges. "I promise I'll tell you. Everything. Just not today." She nodded. "Okay, just don't disappear again." And for him, that meant more than any signed contract. The next day, Kylie received an unexpected delivery, a simple box with a rare flower and a handwritten note. I can't give you all the answers now, but I can give you my presence, and maybe an invitation. Inside were 2 tickets to the town's autumn festival. She held the envelope with trembling hands. It wasn't just an event invitation, it was a step, a silent request to enter a world he still didn't know how to explain. That night, she pulled from her closet a simple yet beautiful dress she'd saved for some special occasion that might never come. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled shyly. It had been a long time since she'd dressed up, but that night called for something different. It called for courage. It called for hope. And though she was full of doubts, she decided to go. Because something inside told her that some stories only begin when we choose to step off script. Meanwhile, Aidan was getting ready too. In the mirror, the man in the tailored suit no longer represented him. He chose something simple but intentional. Looked at the clock, then out the window. He was afraid. Afraid of disappointing her. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid of the past still haunting him. But above all, afraid of not trying. And that was new for him. Because, for the first time, he wanted to be seen. Not for what he owned, but for what he felt. They arrived at the event almost at the same time. The town square was decorated with hanging lights, live music, and the scent of caramel apples in the air. Children ran between booths, and couples danced under the soft glow of lanterns. Kylie and Aidan met near the cider stand. He extended his hand without a word, and she took it, a simple gesture. But for 2 hearts marked by distrust, it was the beginning of a miracle. They danced. Slowly, without pressure, without audience. Just 2 strangers who, for some reason, felt at home in each other's arms. Kylie laughed when he stepped on her foot. He smiled when she purposely missed a step to make it even. It was as if time had granted them a truce. As if that dance was a silent pact between 2 worlds that had refused to collide, but were now starting to intertwine. But in the middle of the night, something changed. A man in a dark suit approached Aidan discreetly and handed him an envelope. Aidan looked at it, frowned, and tucked it away without a word. Kylie noticed. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes, just a reminder of a world I haven't escaped yet," he said, forcing a smile. The crack widened, and she felt it. Later, that night, alone at home, Kylie looked at the shoes still on her feet, the note she'd tucked in her bag, and the flower now resting in a glass of water. Something was growing, but alongside it came the intuition that something big was being hidden. And Aidan's silence, though sweet, could also wound. Still, she wanted to keep going, because there was a sadness in him she recognized. And no one deserves to carry the weight of the world alone. Aidan returned to the hotel that night with a restless mind. Dancing with Kylie had been more than a shared rhythm. It had been a dive into something he couldn't name. But the envelope he'd received during the festival had pulled him back into the reality he was trying to postpone. Inside were documents requiring his immediate signature. And more than that, a summons for a board meeting in New York in 2 days. It was as if time were collecting its debt for daring to live off script. And now, he would have to choose. Kylie woke the next morning with a bittersweet feeling. The previous night still pulsed in her memory, but something about Aidan's look at the end of the festival wouldn't leave her mind. She wasn't naive. She could tell when someone was hiding something important. And although he was kind, present, and full of depth, there were parts of him locked behind doors she might never open. And that doubt began to grow like a subtle shadow over the memory of his touch. As she prepared the morning bread, she thought about the things she didn't ask. Who was Aidan really? What did he do before showing up in town? Why did he always seem torn between 2 worlds, physically present, but mentally drifting elsewhere? And most of all, why did she care so much? She didn't know if she was ready to open her heart again, but it had already crossed the line her mind had drawn. And now, all she could do was hope he was real. That on the other side of town, Aidan typed a message that began with, "I need to tell you something," and erased it 3 times. He didn't want to lose her, but he also couldn't build something on a foundation of omission. He knew that sooner or later, Kylie would discover who he really was. And that might be the end. But maybe, just maybe, it could also be the beginning. The next morning, Kylie was arranging the bakery's front display when she heard the bell ring. Her heart quickened instinctively, but it wasn't Aidan. It was just an elderly man looking for fresh bread. She smiled, served him kindly, and returned to her task. But the emptiness left by Aidan's absence was getting harder to ignore. In recent days, he had appeared with the ease of someone who didn't want to be noticed. But now, his silence carried weight. And silence, when it comes from someone who touches your heart, hurts more than harsh words. Aidan, meanwhile, had left town at dawn. He hit the road while it was still dark, heading toward the nearest private airport. The meeting in New York was inevitable, and avoiding it now would seem careless or weak. But the journey wasn't just geographic. It was emotional. With every mile away from Kylie, it felt like he was leaving something precious behind. For the first time, he didn't want to be where money called. He wanted to be where his heart had begun to wake up. On the plane, he stared out the window at the clouds below. He thought of Kylie's face as she spoke about flowers, recipes, simple dreams. That woman disarmed him, made everything he'd learned about power seem childish. And more than that, she stirred in him a kind of guilt he'd never felt before, the guilt of not being fully honest with someone who had only ever given him the truth. Aidan had always believed control was strength, but now he was beginning to understand that courage was something else. It was telling the truth, even when you're afraid of losing what you loved. In New York, he was met with chaos. Meetings, phone calls, numbers, graphs. The company needed swift decisions about mergers, cuts, repositioning. Aidan listened to everything, but responded little. His thoughts were far away. Kylie's smile surfaced between one slide and another. The sound of her laugh drowned out the dry voices in the boardroom. His partners didn't understand his demeanor. They whispered that he wasn't himself anymore. And they were right, because he had discovered a version of himself they had never seen. Meanwhile, Kylie received an offer to deliver her baked goods to a new cafe opening in a neighboring town. It was an opportunity, something she'd always wanted, to grow what she did with love. But strangely, she couldn't celebrate. She felt split, not just because of Aidan's absence, but because of the lack of explanation. She didn't need promises. She just wanted truth, even if it hurt. And he hadn't left her any. Only that silence that grew louder each day. On Friday afternoon, while serving tea to an elderly lady, a news segment on the radio caught her ear. Shareholder meeting of the Alverstone Group defines new direction for the holding. Under the leadership of Aidan Blake, she froze. The cup nearly slipped from her hands. Aidan Blake. The name hit like thunder. It was him, the lost delivery guy, the man who had offered her coffee, a dance, and silence. Everything suddenly made sense, and at the same time, nothing did. She rushed out the back door before even understanding why she was crying. She sat on a bench in the town square, eyes brimming, fists clenched. It wasn't just about him being rich. It was about him hiding it, about her letting her guard down, and the fear of being nothing more than a curiosity in a world that wasn't hers. His words echoed in her mind. "I can't tell you yet." She might have understood if he had tried, but now it felt like cowardice. And Kylie had been broken by cowardice too many times before. At the company headquarters, Aidan was wrapping up his final meeting with only one thought: go back. He needed to see her. He needed to tell her everything. The fear was still there, but regret was now screaming louder. He flew back the same day, but he didn't know that by then, something had already shattered, and it wouldn't be easy to piece it back together, because truths that arrive too late leave different kinds of scars. When he returned to town, he went straight to the bakery. The sky was overcast, as if announcing an emotional storm. Kylie was there, but not behind the counter. She was sitting with the owner, discussing the new offer. When she saw him, she froze. He approached slowly, his eyes pleading for a chance. "Kylie." She stood, calm but with firm eyes. "You lied to me." Aidan took a deep breath. "I held it back, out of fear." She shook her head. "Fear, I could have understood. But omission, I can't." He tried to explain, spoke of the mission, the test, the need to step off the pedestal and understand the roots of the company. Said he never planned to fall in love, that she was the most beautiful, unexpected thing in his life. But Kylie, though clearly moved, didn't yield. "I'm not against your truth, Aidan. I'm against the fact that you thought I couldn't handle it. That says more about what you think of me than about you." And that hurt. It hurt more than she imagined, and more than he had ever felt. The bakery fell silent, until the owner quietly excused herself. Aidan sat down, shoulders heavy. I never meant to hurt you. I know, but that doesn't change the fact that it did. And Kylie wasn't the kind to cry in public, but her eyes were wet. I need time, she said at last. Time to figure out if what I felt was for you, or for the idea I built in the absence of truth. Aidan nodded, for the first time, without trying to fix it, because he knew she was right. That night, it rained hard. Aidan stayed in the hotel, staring at the ceiling. He thought of all the things he could have done differently, how small hidden truths can become walls too high to climb, and how cruel it is to realize that love, no matter how real, cannot survive without trust. Kylie, at home, held the old note between her fingers. For those who know how to guide. Now she was the one who needed to guide herself. And that might mean going on without him. Days passed without contact. The town, once vibrant in color for Aidan, now looked painted in shades of gray. He tried to write, tried to call, but got no reply. And he respected that, because love is also knowing how to wait. Kylie immersed herself in work, determined to move her goods to the new cafe. But her heart still weighed heavy, still asked, silently, if he would come back. And more than that, if she would be ready when he did. At the bakery, a new customer complimented her hope cake. Tastes like a fresh start, he said. And Kylie smiled, sadly. It was made for that, because sometimes starting over is the only way. But inside, she still carried a part of him, not as a wound, but as a mark, a reminder that love can be real, even when it fails. And that truth, even when late, can still heal, if received with humility. That on Saturday morning, Aidan returned to the bakery once more, but stayed outside. He watched Kylie serving a group of kids with her usual warmth. Her smile was still there, but he could see the pain behind it. He didn't have the courage to enter. He just stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the window. When she noticed him, their eyes met for an instant. And then she looked away. That hurt more than anything she could have said, because now her silence was a choice. And that carried weight. Back at the hotel, Aidan opened his laptop and began to write. But not reports, not emails. A letter, with everything. No filters, no excuses. He told her about his father's death, about the loneliness, about his search for something real in an empire built on appearances. He told her about the fear of being loved only for his name, about the armor he'd worn for years, and about how she, effortlessly, had broken all of that. He asked for forgiveness, not for who he was, but for not trusting her enough to share the truth. At the end of the letter, he wrote, I don't know if there's still space for me in your life, but if there is, know that this time I will come to you whole. He printed it, placed it in a plain envelope, and left it with the bakery owner, asking her to hand it to Kylie personally. He didn't ask for a reply. He just waited, from afar, with a heart beating as if it all depended on a single choice from her. Aidan had always had power, influence, and control, but now, all he had was vulnerability. Kylie received the envelope. At the end of her shift, she climbed to the attic of her house, the place where she kept memories and allowed herself to cry in peace. She opened it gently, as if fearing the contents more than expecting them. As she read, the tears began to fall, not from anger, not from pity, but from someone who recognized the courage it takes to be bare. The letter wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that moved her. For the first time, she saw Aidan truly naked, not his body, but his soul. That night, she walked to the town's overlook with the letter in her hands. She sat on the same wooden bench where she had once cried over others for less, and she thought about all they had lived in such a short time. The subtle touch, the clumsy dance, the shared coffee, the unspoken words. She still didn't know what she would do, but she knew the love she felt for him wasn't a fantasy. It was a response, and responses like that aren't thrown away. The city lights flickered on, one by one. Below her, Kylie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the space between pain and a new beginning. And in that moment, for the first time in days, she smiled. Not because she knew what would happen, but because she finally felt that, despite everything, there was still enough truth to try again. The next morning, Kylie woke before the sun. She set water to boil, sat at the kitchen table, and opened Aidan's letter again. She read each line in silence. as if decoding the fragments of a man no one had ever truly seen whole. She didn't know what to say or whether she was ready to forgive, but there was something in those words that left no room for doubt. He wasn't trying to convince her. He was simply being honest. And for someone who had always been surrounded by empty promises, that was already a beginning. Aidan spent the day walking through the town as if it were a living memory. He stopped by the market, bought simple flowers and a sweet roll from the same stall Kylie had once praised. He talked to people, listened to stories. He truly wanted to understand the place that had changed how he saw the world. But more than anything, he wanted to be near her, without intruding, without pressure. He knew earning back her trust would take more than words. It would take time. And he was willing to wait. At the bakery, Kylie worked quietly. The letter had left marks, not of pain, but of reflection. She began to realize how much she had armored herself to, how quickly she had judged before listening. And perhaps that was what connected her to Aidan in such an unexpected way. They had both been running from their own fears when they met. The problem now was there was nowhere left to hide, and she had to decide if she was ready to risk it, because trusting someone is also a choice. At the end of the afternoon, she asked for a break and walked to the small square where everything always seemed lighter. She sat with the letter in her lap and a cup of tea she'd brought from home. The wind was cold, but the sky was clear. And somehow, that felt like a sign. As she reread the final paragraph, she heard footsteps approaching. It was him. Aidan stopped a few steps away, unmoving. "May I sit?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away, but after a few seconds, she nodded. They sat side by side, in silence. Just like at the beginning. No touch, no urgency, just presence. "I read your letter," she said. "Thank you for reading it." He looked at her, trying to understand her tone. "I needed to be honest," he said, "for the first time, with someone who really matters." She took a deep breath. "You hurt me, Aidan, not because of your story, but because you left me in the dark. I know, and I don't have excuses, only a request that you let me try to do things differently, this time with truth." Kylie looked at him like someone searching for cracks in already broken glass. But what she saw was a man stripped of pride, a man who had chosen vulnerability, and that touched her more deeply than any speech. "I don't know if I can trust." "Again, not yet. You don't have to. Not now," he said gently. "I just want to show you I can learn to become the kind of man you won't have to doubt." His sincerity cut through the air like a warm breeze on a cold day. And for the first time, she believed him. In the days that followed, Aidan made subtle appearances. He didn't invade. He simply remained present. He brought fresh bread early in the morning, ordered cakes for neighbors, sat in the square with a notebook, sketching plans to transform the old abandoned factory into a community center, an idea born from their last conversation. Kylie watched from afar. Each gesture, each effort. She said nothing, but inside, her pride began to soften. One afternoon, she received an anonymous note at the bakery. "The world needs more people who stay, even when they've made mistakes. Thank you for being one of them." There was no signature, but she knew. She placed the note in the same box where she kept the letter. And there, in that small ritual of storing words, she began to store something else. Hope. Not blind, not immediate, but real. Aidan, in turn, began helping with small-town tasks. He restored benches in the square, donated books to the school, and sponsored the renovation of the public library, all anonymously. People began to respect him without knowing who he was. And he discovered a new way of existing. Without applause, without titles, just by being useful. It was in this space that he understood the true value of small gestures, the same value he had first seen in Kylie's smile. She, slowly, began to let him in. A coffee accepted, a longer conversation, a question answered with more detail. There were no guarantees, but there was effort. And one ordinary afternoon, she invited him to sit in the bakery's kitchen while she made cookies. It was her first spontaneous invitation. He accepted it as one accepts a gift. He sat and listened to stories about her grandmother's recipes, her childhood, her scars. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened. And at that moment, that was all she needed. Kylie knew there was still a gap between them. They saw the world through different lenses. But there was something in Aidan she recognized, the sincere desire to stay. And to her, that meant more than any fortune. Because someone who stays after making mistakes reveals the truth of their feelings. She didn't know if it would become love again, but she no longer feared finding out. The following week, the town organized a charity event to renovate the local hospital. Kylie was invited to provide the desserts. Aidan quietly sponsored part of the renovations, but neither of them mentioned it. They simply worked side by side. And when night fell, with the community hall lit up, they danced again. No audience, no pretense, just two hearts that had been broken, now gently beginning to mend. While they danced, Kylie looked into his eyes. "I still don't know what we are." And he replied, calmly, "Neither do I. But I know what I don't want, to miss the chance to find out." She smiled, lowering her eyes for a moment. "Just promise me that from now on, you won't hide from me anymore." Aidan held her hand firmly. "I promise to come to you whole, even if it scares me." And for the first time, she believed without hesitation. That night, as they walked back in silence, Aidan placed his coat gently over her shoulders when the wind picked up. A small gesture, but to Kylie, it was the biggest of all, because it wasn't about protection. It was about care, about someone who observes, understands, and acts. And that, to her, was love in its truest form. When they arrived at the bakery, she invited him in. He declined with a respectful smile. "Tonight, I just wanted to walk you as far as you feel safe." She nodded, moved. "Thank you." And when the door closed behind her, she leaned against it with both hands over her heart. Not because it hurt, but because, finally, it was beginning to heal. Aidan, walking down the quiet street, looked up at the stars. He thought about how love wasn't made of cinematic moments, but of shared coffees, respected silences, and daily choices. And there, alone under the sky, he knew something inside him had changed forever. Because Kylie wasn't just a woman. She was the mirror of everything he could become, if he had the courage to remain whole. The next morning, Kylie found a small ceramic pot on the bakery's doorstep with a lavender sprout inside. Tied to the stem was a handwritten note, "So, that calm may bloom, even when the day feels heavy." She held the gift gently and closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't need grand gestures. That's what made it all so beautiful. Aidan was learning, not how to impress her, but how to listen. And there, between lavender and memories, she began to realize that maybe love was this, a series of small acts of care that, together, build permanence. Later that day, while making a delivery at the local school, she overheard two teachers talking about the quiet newcomer helping with renovations and donations. Kylie smiled discreetly. She knew who it was, but said nothing. Aidan didn't want recognition. He just wanted to belong. And little by little, he was succeeding. That small town, full of stories, was beginning to welcome him, not because of his name, but because of his actions. And to Kylie, that was the greatest sign of transformation. At dusk, Aidan showed up at the bakery gate, as he had done often. But this time, he brought a basket with simple ingredients. "I thought we could cook together. I'm not good at it, but I'd like to learn." Kylie laughed and invited him in. They cooked in silence, exchanging glances and quiet smiles. The kitchen felt like home, not just a workplace. And when he burned the caramel for the second time, she let out a laugh that filled the space like music. For the first time, they laughed together without fear. Without the past, just the now. After dinner, they sat on the bakery's porch with 2 mugs of tea in hand. The breeze was gentle, and the streetlights cast soft shadows on the floor. "You know what scared me the most?" she said, watching the steam rise from her cup. "Thinking that everything might have been just an experiment to you. A test." Aidan shook his head. "I was testing myself, Kylie. But you taught me what truth is, and there's no going back for me." She looked at him with tenderness. For the first time, there was no wall left between them. Little by little, Aidan's name began to circulate among the townspeople, but not as a millionaire. He was known as the guy with the morning bread, or the man who helped fix up the school. No one imagined the fortune behind his shy smile and quiet gestures, and that's how he preferred it. For the first time, he felt comfortable being just another face in the crowd, and that was liberating. The town didn't demand performance. It asked for presence, and he was fully present, in the repaired benches, in the anonymous donations, in the attentive way he watched Kylie. Kylie, for her part, noticed how his presence shifted everything around him. Children greeted him as if he'd always been there, Elderly men invited him to play dominoes in the square. Shopkeepers welcomed his curious questions about how their businesses worked. He listened with genuine interest. He didn't judge. He didn't interrupt. And most of all, he never acted above anyone. To her, that was the clearest proof. He wasn't just trying to stay, he was trying to belong. At a town meeting discussing the renovation of the cultural center, Aidan asked to speak. With a steady voice and humble posture, he suggested creating a free space for workshops and courses, especially for young people and aspiring women entrepreneurs. He offered to fund the initial setup, but insisted the project should belong to the community, not to him. There was a moment of silence. Then applause. Kylie stood at the back of the hall, her throat tight with emotion. That was the kind of man she would choose, if she had the courage. After the meeting, people came up to thank him. A local journalist became intrigued by the generous stranger quietly changing the town. Aidan declined all interviews. "I don't want to be a headline. I just want to be a neighbor," he said with a soft smile. The quote spread quickly through town social media. Ironically, the more he avoided the spotlight, the more people wanted to know who he was. But what few realized was this: the man they admired had learned everything from a baker with flour on her hands and principles carved in stone. Kylie began receiving attention too. A feature in the local paper described her as the young woman who turned a kitchen into a symbol of resilience and grace. For the first time, she was invited to speak at a neighboring town school about how she started, what she learned, and why she never gave up. In the audience, front row, stood Aidan, eyes shining. When she finished her speech and looked toward him, he simply placed a hand over his heart, as if to say, "I hear you." After the event, they walked down a lamplit street. "I don't know how all this happened," she said. This. The whole town paying attention." Aidan smiled. "Sometimes, it only takes one person doing the right thing for everyone else to start listening." She touched his arm gently. "And sometimes, it just takes someone truly listening for everything to change." They walked on in silence. But it was a comfortable one. Days later, Kylie received a special package. A custom-made apron embroidered with the phrase, "Hopeful Sweets, where new beginnings have flavor." Inside the box was a small key. Confused, she went looking for Aidan. He was waiting at the door of the renovated old factory. "Come with me," he said, eyes gleaming. She followed. Inside, she found a brand new kitchen, filled with light, modern equipment, and all the handmade charm she loved. "This," she began, emotional. "This is your new space. If you want it," Aidan whispered. "And if you'll allow it, I want to be here too." She didn't answer immediately. She walked around in silence, touching counters and cabinets. "I always dreamed of a space like this, but thought it was dreaming too big." Aidan stepped closer. "What you have deserves space. Deserves to be seen. I just did what should have been done a long time ago. Believe in you exactly as you are." She turned to him, holding the key between her fingers. "It's not about the space. It's about the man you chose to become." And in that moment, something between them settled. On opening day, the entire town showed up. Children, elders, families, all came to see our baker's new place. Aidan stayed behind the scenes, passing out plates, cleaning tables, avoiding speeches. But in every gesture, Kylie saw love expressed through action. When she finally called him to the front and publicly thanked him, he was visibly shy. "I'm only a part of this because someone listened to me. And today, all I want is to keep listening." Applause broke out before he could say more. Later that evening, they were alone in the kitchen. Kylie looked out the window as the sun set. "It still scares me how fast everything changed," she said. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But I've learned that real love isn't the one without fear. It's the one that chooses to stay, even with it." She looked at him tenderly. "Then stay." He smiled. "I've been staying for a while now. I was just waiting for you to notice." That night, after the inauguration, the town felt calm. But inside the old factory, now transformed, Kylie's heart beat with a quiet certainty. She walked the hallway leading to the back room, where she planned to set up a free training space for young bakers. She knew she was making history. But, more than that, she felt something inside her healing. Something she thought no one would ever see. But Aidan had seen it. From a distance, Aidan watched her, admiring her steady presence, her quiet shine, her way of leading without raising her voice. When she stopped to listen to an employee, when she folded towels with care, when she smiled. Despite tired eyes, that was strength. Not the kind glorified in boardrooms, but the quiet strength that builds something real. He thought of how long he'd searched for leadership in spreadsheets. Now he knew. His greatest teacher was a woman who baked cakes and changed lives as they closed up the space for the night. She turned on a single light, leaving the room in a warm, sleepy glow. Aidan walked over with 2 mugs of tea. No cider tonight, but I brought presents, he joked. She laughed. Presents is the main ingredient. They sat on the floor, leaning against the wall like 2 teens rediscovering calm in the middle of chaos. Outside, the town slept. But in that kitchen, everything was waking up. Do you think the world will accept this simple life of ours? She asked with quiet uncertainty. I don't know if the world will, he replied firmly. But I do, and that's enough for me. Kylie nodded slowly. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to fight alone. For the first time, she was beside someone who didn't just admire her, but walked with her. And that was rarer than any passion she'd ever known. From that day on, their routine blended with the town's rhythm. No glamour, no headlines, but a new pattern of happiness was stitched together in the small things: sharing coffee, walking hand in hand after closing up shop, receiving drawings from children of the bakery. And every day, Aidan left a different note in the kitchen before leaving. Simple phrases, but always the same message. I'm here. Kylie started doing the same. A note in his coat pocket, a cinnamon roll tucked into his bag before a town meeting, a handwritten message between his papers. Thank you for staying. Their love didn't need promises, only consistency. And it was that consistency that healed the wounds they both carried. It didn't erase the past, but it made the present livable. Safe point one day, sitting on the porch of the old factory, now called the House of New Beginnings, Aidan took Kylie's hand and asked, do you still think what we have is too much to work? She took a breath, looked out at the quiet street, then back at him. I think what we have is everything I was told would never be enough. But now I see, it's exactly what I needed. And she squeezed his hand, like someone who has made up their mind. From that moment on, there was no more doubt. They were still different, still from distant worlds, but they had learned to listen to each other. And more than anything to choose each other. Every day, no grand declarations, just presence. And that was enough. Because true love doesn't begin perfect. It's the kind that chooses to stay when everything else says to walk away. On the last night of that month, the whole town gathered again, not to celebrate a project, but to say thank you. Kylie was called on stage by the local school principal. Aidan stood at the back of the crowd. When she began to speak, her voice trembled with emotion. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for believing that an ordinary woman with flour on her hands and tired feet could dream big. Today I know the kind of love that grows slowly is the kind that lasts. Applause filled the room. But what made Kylie truly smile was Aidan's gaze from the back. No banners, no microphone, just him, whole, present, and listening, as he always had. And that night, she understood. The town had learned to listen to them. Because first, they had learned to listen to each other. And together, they turned silence into permanence. In the months that followed, the House of New Beginnings became more than just a bakery. It was a meeting place, a space for sharing, learning, and belonging. Young people learned more than just recipes there. They discovered self-worth. Women restarted not just careers, but their confidence in themselves. And every corner of the space carried something of Kylie and something of Aidan. She brought the soul, he offered the structure. Together, they had built a collective home. But more than that, they had become home to each other. Aidan continued to turn down interviews, titles, and any kind of public recognition. But that didn't make him invisible. In town, he was Kylie's Aidan. And he smiled every time he heard that. Because being someone's, in that context, wasn't about possession. It was about affection. It was a choice, a bond. For the first time in years, he knew exactly where he wanted to be. And the most beautiful part was knowing that with her, he didn't need to prove anything. Just be and stay. Kylie became more and more respected, not because of him, but because of what she stood for. She was the woman who stayed when many left, who built with her own hands, who didn't need to change to be seen, and who, even wounded, chose to start again. The girls in town looked up to her. The older women shared recipes with her. and the men listened to her with the same reverence they would offer a master. Kylie was, finally, recognized. But most importantly, she was at peace with herself. At home, her routine with Aidan was simple, almost silent. They had dinner together 3 times a week. They shared books, tended to the garden, exchanged notes, music, and confidences. They didn't live glued to each other, but they knew they were in one another. There was something profoundly stable in the way they treated each other, as if they knew that for love to last, it doesn't need spectacle. It needs respect, listening, presence, and that they did masterfully. One rainy afternoon, Aidan showed up holding a small box. It wasn't a ring, nor jewelry. It was a picture frame with a photo of the two of them sitting on the kitchen floor, laughing at the cake dough that never rose. "I want this to be our official memory," he said, "because it was that day I realized love isn't made of getting it right. It's made of those who keep trying." Kylie hugged him tenderly and thought that maybe, after everything, they had finally learned how to stay. In the following weeks, they started planning small workshops for local residents. Aidan dedicated himself to teaching basic management concepts using simple, accessible language. Kylie taught how to bake cakes with stories because, according to her, the best sweets are the ones that carry memory. The classes were full, and so were the hearts. The town was rebuilding itself from the inside, and they, even without making noise, had become pillars of that transformation. One night, Aidan asked, "Are you still afraid?" Kylie smiled, looking at the sky. "I am, but now I have you, and that changes everything." He held her hand. "I'm afraid too, but it's your hand that teaches me not to run." And in that quiet touch, they sealed something that didn't need solemn promises. Just the certainty they would be there, especially on the hard days. On the morning of the bakery's anniversary, Kylie arrived to find notes scattered across the walls, all handwritten by people from town. "Thank you for teaching me to believe again. You made my son dream again. Your dessert tastes like a hug." Each phrase, a seed planted. Kylie cried silently as she read them. And when Aidan arrived, she embraced him like never before. "This right here is everything I ever needed to be in life. And you helped me get here." That same day, Aidan asked for permission to speak to everyone present. He stood on a chair, timidly, and took a deep breath. "I came to this town as a test. I wanted to know if real people still existed, if kindness without interest still existed. And I found you all. I found this woman. I found a world that my fortune never gave me. And I just wanted to say thank you for teaching me that what matters most in life can't be bought. It's built with affection, with time, with listening." There was silence after his words, then applause, and finally hugs. Aidan stepped down and was greeted with warm, respectful glances. From afar, Kylie watched him with pride and thought about all that he had become. Not the CEO, but the man who stayed, the man who listened, the man who, even with every reason to leave, chose to belong. She knew nothing was guaranteed, but she also knew their love now had roots. That night, after all the celebrations, Kylie and Aidan walked hand in hand through the empty streets of the town. The ground still had petals scattered by the children and leftover colored lights hanging between the lampposts. They walked in silence, as if they understood that the best moments don't need words. They stopped in front of the old factory, now home to so many stories. Kylie leaned against the wall and looked at him. "Remember when you brought me here the first time? Of course. You said I looked like someone with more questions than maps. And now," she asked, smiling, "now I've learned that the best questions don't have easy answers, but they do have paths. And you are my path, Kylie." She was moved by the simplicity of the phrase. It wasn't a proposal, nor a cinematic declaration. It was just truth. And she had learned with him that when truth repeats itself in small doses every day, it becomes the most beautiful promise. One that doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be kept. They went inside and sat on the kitchen floor, like so many times before. The place smelled of fresh bread and lavender, a mix that had become the invisible signature of their new beginning. Aidan brought 2 cups of tea, and they sat there watching the steam rise. "I still don't know what the future holds," she said. "But I know that today, for the first time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow." He rested his forehead against hers and answered, "Because today, we're no longer alone." Days later, word came from the press. A major business magazine wanted to run a story on Aidan's life transformation. He declined. But for the first time, he didn't hide. The reason? Everything I needed to be, I already am. And what I wanted to build is right here. He pointed to the kitchen, to the people, to Kylie. The reporter, stunned, said it would make a great story. It would, Aidan replied. But some stories aren't meant for magazine covers. They're meant to be lived in the silence of gestures. At the bakery, life went on. But now, every customer who entered felt like part of something bigger. There were notes pinned to the wall with words of gratitude, children drawing their own versions of the house of new beginnings. And even tourists who came from far away after hearing rumors about a place where people listen with their hearts. Kylie laughed at the exaggerations, but deep down she knew it was true. What they had built there wasn't fame. It was listening, care, and permanence. One afternoon, while closing up, Aidan found Kylie distracted by her old recipe notebooks. He sat beside her and asked, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" She smiled. "And what would I call it?" He answered without hesitation, "Recipes for Staying." She went silent for a moment, then said, "I think now I'd have enough stories for each chapter." And he replied, "And I, for each dedication." Time passed, and with it came challenges, doubts, and weariness. But now, they knew how to face them, not with fairy tale promises, but with real gestures. A cup of tea when the other was quiet. Space when the other needed to breathe. A hug when words fell short. And above all, the daily decision to keep choosing to stay, even when the routine felt heavy, even when the rush of the world tried to pull them from the ground they had planted. Together, one night, sitting on the porch with blankets over their knees, Kylie said, "You know, I used to think life would save me in some grand moment. But it came in the simple things." Aidan nodded. Life saved us in silences, in aimless walks, in coffee shared, and she added, and in words that turned into presents. They toasted with tea. There was no audience, no show, just two whole hearts. Whole for the very first time. And so, without needing grand finales, their love went on. Quiet, steady, present. It wasn't about altar vows, but about the daily care of someone who looks into your eyes and says, "I'm here," and stays. Because, in the end, true love. Stories don't end in fireworks. They bloom in the details and remain, just as they chose to do. Time passed without haste, just like everything real tends to do. The bakery thrived, now with 2 additional branches in neighboring towns, all carrying the same essence: listening, care, and presence. But the heart of the project still beat. In that very first kitchen where everything began. Kylie, apron tied and smile serene, had become a symbol of resilience and sweetness. And Aidan, still discreet, had become a reference for a new kind of leadership, one built on empathy, listening, and truth. But above any title, he was simply a man who chose to stay. One morning, Kylie woke up to find an envelope resting on her pillow. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was his. She sat up in bed, sunlight gently filtering through the window, and opened it carefully. "This isn't a proposal or a surprise. It's just another truth. I've chosen to walk with you every day. And if one day you feel like calling that forever, I'll be here, ready to say yes." She read in silence, her heart calm, her eyes damp. It was the most beautiful proposal she'd ever received. Not for promising eternity, but for choosing the now. Aidan wasn't at breakfast that morning. He was at the Overlook, where everything always seemed clearer. He waited, not expectantly, just hopefully. When he heard footsteps behind him, he didn't need to turn. He knew it was her. Kylie sat beside him and reached for his hand. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and gentle. "But on one condition." He smiled, curious. "That what we've built always stays bigger than the ceremony. I want a home, not a stage." He responded with the calm of someone who understood everything. "I never wanted an audience. Just you." The wedding took place weeks later. Simple, in the garden of the house of new beginnings. No luxurious gowns, no crowd, just the people who had been part of the journey. One of the students' grandmothers made the bouquet. The children sang a song they wrote themselves. And their vows were spoken with the ease of those who had already been living them for a long time. When Aidan took Kylie's hands and said, "I promise to keep listening even when the world screams," there were tears, but not of sorrow. It was the soul recognizing its home. The moon rose early that night, and instead of a party, The couple chose to walk the town streets, just like so many other times. They stopped at the corner bakery, bought 2 pieces of bread, and shared them right there, on a bench in the square. "It tastes like new beginnings," he said. "And permanence," she added. That was their honeymoon. No trips, no luxury, no schedule, just the 2 of them, present, whole, at peace. In the months that followed, they opened a new wing in the House of New Beginnings, a space dedicated to therapeutic listening. Volunteer psychologists, support groups, self-care workshops, because they had learned, together, that listening heals, and that many wounds don't need answers, just a space to be seen. Kylie coordinated the meetings with tenderness. Aidan handled the logistics, each in their own way, but both with the same purpose: turning silence into a place of connection. In town, people had begun calling the project something new, a place where people relearn how to live. Maybe it was an exaggeration, but for many, it was true, because the focus there wasn't on success, it was on reconciliation, with others, with the past, with oneself. And to Aidan, that was worth more than any international merger. He often said, "What we build with truth, time can't destroy." And time proved it every day. One afternoon, Kylie found Aidan writing alone on the porch steps. "What's that?" she asked. "A gratitude journal," he replied. "I write one reason to be thankful every day." She gently picked it up and read a page. It said, "Today I'm grateful for her silence, because it's in silence that she hears me completely." She sat beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for never trying to fix me." And he answered, "You never needed fixing, just space to bloom." Over time, they were invited to speak at lectures, events, interviews. They declined most, but they accepted one at a public school in the capital. There, Aidan spoke to the students about what he had learned. The world will try to tell you success has a shape, but it lies. What's truly worth it is finding someone who sees you without needing to change you, and building, with that person, a world where both of you can exist freely. Many students applauded, but a boy in the back cried silently. And that was enough. On the way home, Kylie said, "Sometimes I think we have no idea how far the impact of our choices goes." And Aidan replied, "I think that's how it should be. We live truthfully and let the world listen in its own time." And as always, she paused a moment before adding, "Thank you for letting me be who I am." He smiled, brushing his fingers against hers. "You taught me how. I just learned how to stay." One night, as they were closing the bakery, they found an envelope at the door. Inside was a note from a young woman in town. "Watching you gave me the courage to leave an abusive relationship. I used to think love meant suffering. Now I know love is when someone stays through your hardest days. Thank you." Kylie read it aloud. Aidan took a deep breath. "I never imagined that a cup of coffee, a slice of cake, a moment of listening could change so much." And she replied, her eyes misty, "Sometimes changing someone's world is already changing the world." And so the days went on. Simple, with challenges and joys. Sleepless nights and mornings filled with purpose. Arguments solved through listening. Hugs exchanged before words. Tea on the porch, bread in the oven, letters tucked away in memory boxes. Their love never became a fairy tale. It became ground, roots, a safe space, and more than anything, a reference for those who thought it wasn't possible to be whole in a world constantly demanding fragments. On the 2nd anniversary of the House of New Beginnings, Kylie gave her final speech to the community. "If someone asked me what I've learned from this journey, I'd say just one thing. Listening can change destinies." Listening was the beginning of it all, and still is, because when someone is truly heard, they bloom. In the audience, there were people who had never been seen before. Ordinary people, invisible to the world. But there, they all belonged. As they left, a child ran up to Aidan and handed him a drawing that said, "Thank you for taking care of Annie Kylie." He smiled, knelt down, and replied, "She's the one who took care of me first." And in that gesture, in that meeting of 2 very different worlds, lived the entire essence of what they had built. To care, to listen, to stay, like a recipe that works because it's made with soul and repeated with constancy. That night, at home, Kylie placed the drawing next to the first letter he ever wrote. She closed the box, looked at Aidan, and said, "I don't need anything else." He stepped closer, cupped her face, and replied, I just need to keep deserving my place beside you. And so, quietly, they sealed another day, another chapter, another choice. Because, in the end, love isn't about promising forever. It's about choosing the now, every single day, and making that now a place where both can stay. Whole, real, heard, loved. The next morning, everything looked the same. But inside, everything was different. Aidan made tea before Kylie woke up. He left a note beside the cup with a simple phrase, "I'm still here." And she smiled when she read it. Because now she knew being there wasn't a test anymore, nor a coincidence. It was a choice. And when someone chooses to stay every day, even in the quiet in-between moments, that becomes love in its purest form. Constant, silent, real. Kylie walked to the garden and found Aidan watering the plants, barefoot on the soil, his gaze soft. For a moment, she just stood there, watching. The man who entered her life lost in maps and masks was now the man planting permanence with his own hands. And she knew, without a single word, that this story wasn't made of grand gestures. It was made of presences that never fail. There, in that small backyard, lived the rarest kind of love, the one that learns to listen every day and never leaves. That afternoon, they sat with townspeople to hear their stories. A young mother shared how the space gave her back the courage to dream. An old man revealed that he only began speaking about his wife's death there, in that group where no one had to pretend to be strong. And a teenager confessed that writing letters to himself, inspired by Aidan, helped him find meaning. Kylie looked around and saw they had created something far bigger than themselves. They had created a collective home where words became bridges, where silence was honored, and where love didn't shout. It remained at the end of that day. Aidan sat on the porch with his gratitude journal. He wrote, "Today I'm grateful for being heard, even when I didn't know how to speak, and for finding a home inside someone who never tried to change me." Kylie, reading over his shoulder, hugged him from behind. And together, under the soft evening light, they understood that some stories don't need endings. They only need continuation, and people willing to stay, even when life isn't easy or perfect. And maybe that's the question left for those who followed this story until the end. Who have you truly been listening to? Who is the one who stays when everything gets hard? And most importantly, have you been present in someone's life? Leave a comment. I choose to stay. If this story touched your heart, like it, share it with someone who needs to feel heard, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Stories that don't shout, but remain. Because sometimes, what we need most isn't a promise. It's someone who simply says, "I'm here."